Hi everybody, welcome back to week 2. This video will discuss the readings. I'm going to briefly give you another overview of this week's readings. So we're talking about what does it mean to teach. We're building on some concepts from last week. So when we talked about the teacher-student role, we're going to address that a little bit more this week. And I want you to start thinking in the direction, what does it mean to teach for you specifically? Okay, so something that we are introduced to in the readings is the idea of students as rockets, as we see in Prensky 2012. So last week, like I just mentioned, we discussed the relationship between the teacher and the student and how modern education aims to move away from antiquated pedagogies where we think of the learner as like a deposit box. We've talked about that we must start rewriting this conversation about our students and about education. So Prensky talks about thinking of students as rockets. We need to help them determine what their own trajectory is. So when we're looking at the role of the educator in this instance, he likens it to being as a rocket scientist. So we must fill our students with the proper skills, or what he calls payload, to enable them to fly. So Prensky points out that the skills that we need to develop in our students are the ability to self-monitor, self-assess, and self-control. These are the three most important keys or resources that we need to give our modern learners. And another concept that's really important when we go back and think about the role between the teacher and the student, we should think of students as partners in the classroom. So we see the role of the educator shift away from that as the expert, where we're the know-all. We have all of the contextual knowledge or knowledge of the content that we're supposed to impart on the students, to more of becoming an expert in the actual practice of teaching. So that's not to say that we don't need content knowledge, because that's very important, especially if you are an elementary or early elementary childhood educator. You have to have extensive content knowledge of usually most of all subjects. So that's very, very important. As you go farther in education, so if you're a high school teacher or a college professor, then you'll usually specialize in a certain area, but you still must have content knowledge. We're not taking that out of the equation. But the role of the educator is not only to deliver the knowledge to our students in an active way, but we should help them build that knowledge themselves. So this should be done in tandem with educators. So you want to think about they're holding hands. Students are our partners in the classroom. Another thing that Prensky points out with how modern learners have changed and our understanding of how they've changed is that we must help our students be able to read the world. So they must be able to create, to program, to adopt, to adapt, and to relate to the world around them. Those are essential skills that we need our students to have in order to be successful in any career that they are going into. And Freire, the next reading, states that the biggest mistake in modern education is the disconnect between the teacher and the student. So he mentions what can be said of the teachers who never assume authority in the classroom, who constantly show weakness, doubt, and insecurity in their relationship with the learners. So a lot of times educators can be scared of our students. We want to be seen as the authority figure, right? So we feel like if we get down to their level, then we actually show weakness, which is actually the wrong idea. We should be developing a relationship with our students. It makes us stronger as educators, and it makes them stronger as students. Freire also points out the idea of ethics and aesthetics in teaching and how they cannot be separated. So if you want to think about it this way, this ties into the concept of compassion that we talked about in week 1, where the role of the educator is to understand the student. So that is to truly understand their reality, their community, their background, and how this shapes their learning, their weaknesses, and their strengths. So we cannot think of students as removed from where they come from. When students come into our classrooms, a lot of times we only see them in that context, right? We don't know what their life looks like outside of the classroom. But we need to be able to understand that. What is the community that they come from? What is their background? And how does this shape their learning? So if they come maybe from an impoverished background, we know that might change the way that they're able to learn and the way that they view the world. So at the same time, though, we also need to share the human side of us as educators. So in doing so, not only do we understand our students, but we understand ourselves better, and we start to create a conversation about humanity, which really is the essence of teaching, right? We're helping each other understand the world around us. And another piece mentioned in this week's readings, in order to move towards this conversation about humanity, educators must assess and analyze their own practice. So the more novel idea, though, is that this can be done jointly with students. So once you evaluate your own practice, you start to grow as an educator, and you should do it often. I analyze my practice on a daily and a weekly basis when I'm teaching. But also letting your students know that you are analyzing yourself and that you are growing right along with them helps bring in that human element, but it's also what modern learners require. They need to know that you're a team and that you're invested in their education and that this is a journey that you're taking together. There are many ways that this can be done and imparted to the students. A popular method right now is called transparent teaching. So if you click on this link here, you can find out more about what that is and what that might look like in the classroom. Another concept from the readings is setting the bar high for our students. So in order to propel our students to new heights, like Prensky talks about, we must set the bar high for them. So we must give them something to reach for. And this should be clearly stated to the students, so maybe through transparent teaching practices. So either directly you're telling them, or indirectly you're showing them that you're setting the bar high by how you create your assignments. This shows your students that you have both the confidence and the wherewithal, so you have the content knowledge to drive your students to new heights. And finally, the power of words to transform. So I really like the hairline crack video. It talks about the ability for educators to really shape our learners. And sometimes educators have done a poor job in shaping learners. We've scarred them for life. And maybe you might have talked about that in your reflection from last week. But educators really have the power to transform. So something I want you to think about if you are going into the education field is we must be careful how we choose our words, because they do have lasting effects on our students. So for this week's reflection, I asked you last week to explore how the texts either confirm or conflict with your ideas of the role of teaching and student and modern education. So we talked about what is education, what is learning, we talked about pedagogy, we talked about how can you relate these texts to the type of educational experience that you've had. I asked you to think about what are your own thoughts about the text. Do you agree or disagree with any of the author's points? So moving forward, based on this week's readings, what I'd like you to do is reflect on those moments that you were inspired by an educator. What did the teacher do to inspire you? What words stood out to you? Is there something specifically that they said to you, like in the hairline crack video, that inspired you and encouraged you to grow? And finally, if you are going into the field of education, what inspires you to be an educator? Why are you choosing this path? A couple of reminders. So I posted a video about how to get started with your school observations, so make sure that you do look at that and you get started reaching out to schools. Email me if you have any problems, questions, concerns, you just need some clarification. I'm here for you. Your next discussion post is due next week, which will encompass all the readings from weeks 1 through 3. So make sure that you are doing those reflection activities after the week's readings, so you'll be well prepared for that. And finally, I did want to discuss the results from Socrative. So I really appreciate your honesty on the Socrative poll. It gave me a really good look into why you're taking the course, who you are as students, what you're expecting, and maybe what some of your concerns are. So from what I can see so far, the majority of you are in the course to become an educator, and most of you want to learn how to either plan a lesson or how to organize your thoughts better. So I decided not to include lesson planning as an assignment for this course since we have a pretty heavy assignment load to begin with, but this is something that I will be exploring in a lesson and on the discussion board, so you can get practice in that, and it should help you when you design your 7-minute lesson. So maybe things will be a little bit easier for you and you still get practice in lesson planning. The reason why I took it out of the assignments is lesson planning is a very intricate process. It relies a lot on education theory and instructional design methods. So that's something that you'll probably explore later on in your education courses. So I don't want to go too much into it because there is kind of an art to designing a good lesson plan, but we will definitely discuss it, we'll tackle it, and I'll give you some suggestions. And once you submit a lesson plan, I'll definitely give you some pointers on maybe what are places that you might change, what were some things that you did well, and maybe what are some things that you could improve on. I also hear some of your concerns about the course. I understand that there's some things that you're worried about. However, tying into this week, I'm definitely setting the bar high for you. I have the confidence that you'll do well. And again, if there's any questions, just reach out to me. Great week. Number 2, great job, and I'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.